When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the GreaseCom YouTube channel. Today's video, I want to talk about something that has always been kind of suspicious to me and something I've really kind of thought about as I've been doing my reread for a Game of Thrones. There's a lot of suspicious stuff that I feel like you might be able to correlate with someone like Bloodraven or the Children of the Forest. And I want to talk about how Bloodraven could possibly be manipulating events quite heavily within the book. And again, I am by no means an expert, especially on this topic when it comes to like the old gods and really the Bran plotline. So if you have more to add to this conversation, I'd really like to hear what you guys have to say, because again, I will definitely update this video as more information comes to the forefront. And as I kind of get more in depth with this topic, I also do have a article, or I guess some background information that is going to be linked, that I got some stuff from that I thought was really interesting to build upon my own thoughts. But let's talk about Bloodraven and some of his motivations, some of his possible manipulations of what is going on. And so I want to look at the character of Bloodraven as a whole. Bloodraven is someone that seems like he does not care about what it costs to get good rulership or to have a stable kingdom, right? Think about the Blackfires. Now, again, that is a lot of personal bias, given that Bloodraven really hates Bittersteel, but in a certain way, he is completely right, that as long as the Blackfires are alive, the Targaryens' dynasty was never going to be safe. We're seeing kind of the same thing. Even if Youngriff is a Blackfire, then this is even more true. But we're seeing how that's kind of playing out even now. And so what I think we can kind of gather from the character of Bloodraven is that he's willing to go to extremes to kind of get this stability within the kingdoms. So I want to talk about then, he goes to the wall and he eventually goes missing. So at this point, let's think about what ends up happening here. I want to look at the others, and this is something I never really thought of, and this is something the background article really goes in depth with, so I'd really check it out if you're interested more in this topic. It goes in really hard in depth. But when do the others really start creeping up? Like, we don't really have a certain event that prompts that, right? Like the dragons, for instance, you would go, oh, well, that's when magic came back into the world, so the others started then. Well, no, that's not true at all. They started kind of moving south and making their presence known, being awoken before that. We know that by the prologue of a Game of Thrones, so that can't be it. So what is it? What's that event, right? We know that Craster up to this point has been doing these trade deals with the others, or sacrifices, for years, it would appear. So where is this point that we can go, oh, this is when the others started coming south, maybe trying to get past the wall, doing something against humanity? And I think when you look at where Bloodraven goes missing, and it was only about, I think it was 30 years before the main story, I may be wrong on that, but somewhere around then, it would seem likely that that could be a point of history where the others started becoming more into the world, right? Becoming more known, right? Because even think about 70-ish years before then, or before the main story, was kind of the last wildling King Beyond the Wall thing. And that wasn't really done because of the others, or at least we're not told any information that that was what was the case. So if that wasn't the case, and we haven't seen any other real sightings of the others, and they're starting to creep back into the story, you know, in the last 30 years, what would be the reason? And so this kind of theory takes upon it that Bloodraven is actually instigating the others to attack humanity. So you might be thinking, okay, well, why is that? Well, in a lot of ways, the kingdoms are very divided. Even when Robert is the king, the kingdoms really aren't in the best spot. Yes, they're doing good, as in all the kingdoms are in peace, and there's been a kind of a lot of prosperity for the other kingdoms, not exactly the crown. But we also have a lot of tensions, right? The Dornish don't like the Reach. They don't like the Lannisters, and vice versa, more or less. You have the Starks who don't like the Lannisters. You have the Riverlands who have kind of tensions with the Lannisters. So it's a very divided area, and that's kind of the point here. So I think the way this theory goes, which I find is interesting, this is not my theory. I'm going to add some things onto it. But when you look at this theory and you go, okay, what is Bloodraven doing? Is he trying to unite the kingdoms, give them more of a stable regime, right? Or is he trying to uphaul the entire system as a whole? Maybe Bloodraven has kind of figured out that the way that we have these kings, the way that we elect kings and queens and all these things, it's not the way that it's going to work, right? If you look at the Targaryen dynasty as a whole, that's been proven, right? It only took 300 years for the Targaryens to be out of power. So maybe that's part of it, right? And so you have the others coming south to unite all of our forces. And I think the background information makes a really good point of this is like, think about any time in history. What is always a great uniting factor for a country? War. The United States, right? Before World War I, before World War II, all these times, I would say especially before like Pearl Harbor, World War II time, the country was very divided, whether it was politically, whether it was socially, and all of that. Again, a lot of different cultures in the United States. The one thing that unites the United States is Pearl Harbor and World War II. So is that something that Bloodraven is trying to do here when it comes to Westeros, uniting all of our forces together instead of being so split up? And basically going to this idea that, like, we're all the living, right? That's better than being the non-living or the others or whatever they are. So that could be a part of it. Now, the other thing I want to look at, because again, we don't know a lot about this, right? We don't know a lot about the Long Night and the others the first time. And so it's hard to draw on what exactly could happen there. But I want to look at some other events that I find fascinating. Let's think about the main story. The finding of the direwolves is a very suspicious event. It's not happened. Direwolves haven't been seen south of the wall in years, right? Long years, not just like a couple years. So how does this happen? Because direwolves don't just sprout out south of the wall. Something would have had to happen to allow them to get south of the wall, right? Like there's a giant ass wall protecting the south. Very suspicious. And the other part of this being very suspicious is like, yeah, it dies on a stag. Very on the nose symbolism of to what is going to happen in the story. Maybe this was George just having a very fantastical event, but it doesn't seem that easy to me. And when you also think about it from the idea that like Jon is the only one that hears Ghost, and Ghost when Jon finds him, and Jon being, you know, outside of Bran, the most important Stark to Bloodraven, it's a little interesting the way only Jon can hear it, when you would actually say that all the other Starks also have these same powers as well, or at least some of them have them to certain degrees. But even when we find Ghost, what is Ghost's description of? He's white, he doesn't talk very much, and has red eyes. What does that really remind you of? Bloodraven. Bloodraven is described as having like very pale, milky skin. And Bloodraven is someone that doesn't need to talk that much. He's not a very boisterous character, right? Think about him when it comes in the Dunk and Egg novellas, and the third one specifically. It's very similar. I even point to this idea that when you think about Jon, when they go north of the wall and they're doing their vows, the Ghost finds this hand almost out of nowhere. But even the description of Ghost when he comes back with a hand is very ominous. Like it almost seems a little off. And even when we think about the weirwood trees as a whole, every time that someone is near one, it feels like they're being watched, right? So there has to be this idea that Bloodraven is having some influence here. The way Ghost is basically starting the story for the northern plot, right? Because Ghost finding this hand is going to allow them to find the bodies. Those bodies then are going to in turn come to life. That's going to basically create this entire plot that's going to end up getting Mormont killed, allowing Jon to become the Lord Commander. All of this is quite interesting given the way things happen, because I think Bloodraven did some intervention with letting Ghost find these bodies and or giving Ghost to Jon. A lot comes from that, right? Like think about how much of that impacts in the story. If we even think about other things, right? When it comes to Bran almost completely seems like he's been manipulated by Bran or by Bloodraven, right? Bloodraven, or I guess Three-Eyed Crow, because we're not exactly sure if, you know, what is what there. But when we think about this idea, Bran thought he was going to get his legs back, right? Bran thought he was going to not be a cripple anymore, and that's not the case at all, right? Bran and this group with Mira, Jojen, and Hodor, and everybody else, and Summer, it almost feels like they were lied to, right? They were tricked to come here. And now Bran almost seems like he's being prepped to be this host of a body, to continue on the Three-Eyed Crow's work, or Bloodraven's work. So all of that is very fascinating to me, because you look at Bran's storyline and it fits really well into this whole plot. Like, what is Bran's role in the coming war? What is he going to be? Is he going to be this vessel so now that the old gods or the children of the forest can continue to live on with a younger body and maybe even more powerful? So all that's very interesting, but also Bran could be the person that helps maybe the forces of good unite and take down this force so that they can change the way maybe the governmental system is. Who knows? But even think about how the whole regime that's in place right now changes. This very monstrous boar. Again, remember, it's made to sound very unnatural. It's bigger than any boar that Robert has seen, or even Renly and Barristan when they're talking about this boar. It seems unnatural, right? It completely destroys and kills Robert. But yes, Robert kills it, but the point is already done. Now, maybe this one's a little bit of a far out cry, and maybe it's not actually Bloodraven, but it does seem like something Bloodraven maybe would be able to do, and it'd make a lot of sense as to why he would do this, because getting rid of Robert, right, is going to cause all this infighting and all these other things so that other people can come over that are eventually going to be needed to win against the others, right? It's going to allow someone like Dany, when she comes over, to have an easier time with taking over the country. If everyone's united under Robert, which we've already talked about, not really united, still divided, really Bloodraven is helping kickstart that, right? So again, I don't know if I necessarily believe that one, but I do think it's very suspicious in the way Robert dies and its connection to animals and things like that. Let's think about some other like notable moments when we're looking at maybe some manipulation going on. Think about how Jaime gets this dream while his head is on a weirwood, and it's telling him to go back for Brienne to help save her. That's very interesting. Like, Bloodraven could be telling Jaime to do that because Brienne has a very large part to play in the rest of the story, and he knows that, and so he needs her alive. There's just so many moments throughout the story that just seem a little bit suspicious, a little bit odd. And yes, we don't know the most amount of information about this yet because we just haven't gotten enough of this whole Bran plot, right? Going into Winds of Winter, it's going to explore a lot of the things that, and it'll explore a lot of things and open up new ideas for us to explore on. So let me know what you guys think, right? I think there is some basis of information that makes a lot of sense for this theory, but let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys all in the next one.